One of the last great kings of the Neo-Assyrian Empire was Ashurbanipal, who ruled from 668 to around 630 BCE. If you were to judge him only from the relief sculptures on the walls of his palace, you'd see that he was a militaristic king who was preoccupied with battles and who filled his leisure hours by killing lions from a chariot. But he had another side as well. Unlike most Mesopotamian kings, Ashurbanipal was an intellectual, a man who could read and write, and who studied with the scholars at his court. He collected vast numbers of literary and religious works and organized them in a number of rooms in his palace at Nineveh, in the northern part of modern-day Iraq. This collection is considered to be one of the earliest libraries ever created. Since the documents were written on clay tablets, they survived for more than 2,500 years. Only a few of the texts were what we would recognize as literary, stories about heroes and gods. Although the flood story got most of the press at the time, it was part of a remarkable poem that we call the Epic of Gilgamesh, which I mentioned earlier. The poem is very long. Modern translations cover at least 40 pages. It's also the best-known work of literature from Mesopotamia. We now have many more copies of it from other ancient sites, but it was first identified in the library at Nineveh. The author was a man named Sin-Leke-Unini, who lived around 1200 BCE. Like the later Greek poet Homer, who was of course said to have written down the Iliad and the Odyssey, Sin-Leke-Unini took legends that had been passed down orally, along with some earlier written versions of the epic, and he rewrote them and put them together into a literary masterpiece. His work was copied over and over again, and ended up in Ashurbanipal's library some 500 years later. Gilgamesh probably was a real king, who would have lived about 2,000 years before Ashurbanipal. I say probably because no evidence of him survives from his own time. But we know that some people mentioned with Gilgamesh in various tales were real, so he probably was too.